Well, hey, thank you guys for joining us again for our Proverbs recap of our third part of the series, which is having us look back at Proverbs chapters 11 through 15. With me today is my buddy Bill. We are going to share a couple of things that stood out to us about this section, and I want to take a moment just to encourage you guys. If you're behind, or maybe you're watching this and you haven't even started, there will be a link below the video for you to join in on this study. I've said before to people, if you've gone from not reading the Bible hardly at all to you do a couple of chapters a week, I'm happy because you're reading maybe more than you used to. And so don't be too hard on yourself. This is about getting you into the Word. This is a great book for us guys to do together. Sure. And as I'll reference later, you'll see there's some comments that people have made that have been extremely helpful to learn from each other. So with that, I want to start with you, Bill, actually, today, with what stood out to you as you looked through Proverbs 11 through 15, those chapters in this section.
Yeah, so I think there's this section, and I think the following section, it's packed with a lot of stuff. And unlike some of the chapters that preceded this, a lot of the verses stand out on their own. So what I did is I read chapters 11 through 15 probably 3 or 4 times, noted a couple that stood out, and then went back and to see if I could pull some other verses out. And that's what I did here. And I focused on the ones that had to do with wealth, because I think if you put them together, and then certainly other portions of the Bible, like Ecclesiastes, you get a really I don't want to say complete picture, but you get a fuller picture on just the pitfalls of wealth, some of the things you can do with wealth. And so I'll just kind of rapid fire hit some verses here and then my thought on them. So Proverbs 11:4, it says, "Wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." And here I just put a short note, says, "Don't make money your goal." Certainly makes sense. And then 16, "A kind-hearted woman gains respect, but ruthless men gain only wealth." And that just says to me, have integrity.
Which is also referenced throughout Proverbs, actually, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Even in chapter 11 specifically.
And then 24, "One man gives freely, it gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed." And to me, this is not a prosperity gospel verse. This is a verse that I think verses that convey be generous if you have wealth. And by the way, I think as I think about it, anybody listening to this, you're wealthy.
True.
If you're watching this on an iPhone, you're watching this on a laptop, you are wealthy. And I think that's one of the things that Proverbs, Ecclesiastes really impresses upon you. If you do any traveling, if you go to Mexico, if you go to Africa, you start to see, maybe redefine your definition of wealth.
Because you get a larger context, right? You're not just living in Middle America and seeing how people have what you don't have or whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think a lot on that point, these verses do a lot to humble my heart. I know that. 28, "Whoever trusts in riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf." And so not to trust in God. Or I mean, Corey, you're going to have to
horrible advice.
Corey, to trust in God and not money. 12:9, "Better to be nobody and yet have a servant than pretend to be somebody and have no food." And then jumping ahead to 13:7, which is kind of similar in my mind, is "One man pretends to be rich yet has nothing, and another pretends to be poor yet has great wealth." And that makes me think of, if anybody's heard of The Millionaire Next Door, is the wealthy amongst us in society and reality are people that probably don't stand out as being wealthy. You know, people that have really nice cars are a lot of times in debt. And so it's kind of the opposite of what you think. 11, he who works his, this is 12:11. He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. And that means work hard. And there's one that goes along with it, 14:23. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. And that makes me think of just myself in various times in my life, that you not get rich quick, but you're like, oh, life's really hard. I don't like work. And so your mind starts wandering toward, oh, there's got to be easier path. And what if I did this? Right. Or what if I pursued something that was more fun, or fulfilling to me? And I'm not saying that any of those things are wrong, but it's best that those are fleeting thoughts, because in reality, work is hard, and you have to work for money. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. So those are just some of the highlights that stood out to me, and there's others. But
and that was something, that work is hard. That really ties back to, I want to say, 2 sections ago in our first section, when Mark sat here and talked about the value of work, and I know you watched that. And,
yeah.
And he talked about being known as an upright man, a man who's hardworking and providing for his family, and something that popped into my head when you were talking about wealth was Andy Stanley did a series, and I think he might have turned it into a book, but it certainly is videos you can watch online. And it was a series called How to Be Rich, which I think gains a lot of attention, and that's the whole idea with series titles, right? It's like, oh, what's that mean, And the whole idea reinforces that you are rich, and so it focuses more on, so how do we act and what do we do with that? So I appreciate your insight on that, and that stood out to you and sharing that with us. The things that stood out to me happen to be in Proverbs chapter 11. Look at verse 14. So it says, "For lack of guidance a nation fails, but victory is won through many advisors." I think this points to, and you hear in the men's ministry world, Dave and I often talk about isolation not being a good thing, trying to do life on your own, not seeking out wisdom, which this whole book reinforces the importance of doing so. But when you look at it, it's real easy to be able to dismiss this if you're not a governor or a president or a mayor, because it says, "For lack of guidance, a nation fails." It's like, well, I'm not in government, so I guess that doesn't apply to me. But I think it's very safe, if not, and I would say very appropriate, to parlay that into how you handle yourself in business, how you handle yourself as a family man, if that happens to be you, as a husband or father or both, and then how you carry yourself individually. Because it's real easy to just have my head down and work hard, by the way.
Yeah.
Work hard, have my head down, and just plow forward. But if I don't seek out guidance, I'm missing out on a wealth, no pun intended, but a wealth of knowledge and information. And I happen to notice in our reading plan this last week, in Proverbs chapter 13, in the reading plan, there's always a talk it over section. Those of you that are doing it know about it. And in that, specifically, Joe Voitish, I'm going to quote what he had to say. He quoted Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, okay, which parlays off of what I was talking about in 11. It says, "Walk with the wise," this is his New Living Translation, "walk with the wise, and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble." That sounds like a parent, which it is in this book, right? Sure. He says, "You are who you eat with. If you play up with others in sports, you'll become better yourself, but you need counsel and coaching too." And so I think when Joe references that in our study together, I think what his point is thinking about who you surround yourselves with. So this isn't solely like, I have an advisor on call, a phone a friend person. This
Which
is
actually
nice
to have.
It is, and we use that, right?
Yeah.
But I don't want the people that I get advice from to be, that's all they're doing for me, right? Like when when Joe references in here, you are who you eat with, like who I eat with. I do that 3 times a day, probably more, and who I do that with, that means I'm doing life with those people. And so I want to gain wisdom not just from these cabinet members in my whatever that's called, the group that's around you as a politician, but I actually, when I think about who I'm gaining wisdom from, it might be people that are preaching, it might be people that I'm watching a video on, but it's actually more commonly people I'm doing day to day with.
Yeah, and that's you and Mark Traugott touched on this in the first video, is where you most often screw that up is when you're younger. You know, you're figuring out really the importance and impact of who you hang out with, and I know a lot of my trouble from my early years was who I hung around with. Certainly can't blame it on them. I know better, right?
That's important.
I had all the information I ever needed to have by that time. I was hopefully become more wise since then. But I knew right from wrong, and I was surrounding myself with people, and I'd be in the, I'd just go with the flow. And,
right.
and you're, we can debate now, looking back, whether I was having fun, but in the moment, you think you're having fun. And so,
for sure.
Hopefully you grow out of that as you get older. But again, it's because of who you're around with.
I think, to your point, what you're saying, something that popped into my mind is some of us would consider ourselves leaders. So maybe, we could say maybe, people follow us to some extent. But even as leaders, we follow.
Yeah.
We all follow somebody. So it's not an issue of, I'm not going to be a follower. Well, you're going to be a follower. So let's just follow the right people.
Yeah.
Let's follow God. Let's be a man after God's own heart, like David was. Let's surround ourselves with people that we're not ashamed to follow, that we're proud to follow, and ultimately that we're pointing people to follow Christ. That's what we want to do, right? So I appreciate that thought on that, because I think it's it's something that we pride ourselves that we might not be followers, and it's like, no, we actually ought to pride ourselves that we are followers. We're just choosing to follow Jesus and those who want to live like him with us. The other thing, just to jump back also with Joe Voitish, is speaking about the you are who you eat with and the support that we can give each other. That is not just something that Joe made a comment on in the Talk It Over section on Proverbs out of chapter 13, but also this is something Joe lives, and he doesn't know that I'm bringing this up in here. But if for example, if you're somebody who struggles with addiction or of any kind, alcoholism in particular, or drugs, we have a group that meets here that Joe leads that is specifically for that. And so this isn't just about like, I don't know what couch to buy or what refrigerator I should pick, I'm going to phone a friend. This actually is serious, life-changing stuff. So when it comes down to what it looks like to decide who you're going to dine with, okay, Joe and others here have a group that it's for that reason of getting together with people on the regular, consistently, to support and walk with, to get through the difficult seasons of life, and also help prepare you for the future that lies before you. And Joe does a great job of this. As a matter of fact, this upcoming Sunday, Pastor Tony's going to be referencing Joe at the end of the sermon, I believe, and showing a clip, because we did do an interview with Joe specifically about his story, and I encourage you to watch that. Corey will put it in the description or somewhere for you to click on up here, he says. I don't know. So it's there for you. I encourage you guys to watch that as well. So, Bill, I appreciate taking the time today. There's nothing, there literally is nothing else like the Word of God, and for us to be able to be in it and chat about it together. This ain't no bestseller for the time being. This is
one last thing.
You got something, I could tell.
Did anybody win the lottery yet? Is it still over $1 billion? Okay, so one thing on that, Proverbs 15:16. Better a little with fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a meal of vegetables where there is love than a fattened calf with hatred. And that, I always think of that when the lottery comes up and it's a huge number and it's tempting, and we know how all those stories end, right? They got TV shows about how it destroys these people's lives. And it's better a little fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil, because that's what comes with it. So,
My daughter just the other day must have heard about this lottery,
Yeah.
right? I don't even know. I don't know if it's just Michigan or the U.S. I don't pay that much of attention, but she said something like, "We should get a lottery ticket." And I go, "You know what, Maiden? You never see a rich person playing the lottery."
amen.
This is not how that works. The odds are stacked against you.
It's the best way to buy a headache.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So thank you for joining us today. We're just happy that you're in the Word. And if you at any point ever have any questions about what it is you're reading, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love nothing more than to walk with you and to help you dive in even further. And so we hope that this is just a snapshot that maybe can be something that catches you up so you feel confident jumping into part 4 of the read through, and we're just happy that you're doing it at whatever pace you're doing it at, and we invite you to continue to do so. Have a great day, guys.